Hello viewers and welcome to the video. Today we're going to cover a serious topic known as how to stop an invasion by the French. We'll be talking over France's history and how you can stop an invasion from them today if they ever choose to strike again. So, we're going to the beginning where it all started. And it turns out that the Romans capitalized France before it was ever France. It was a time of wild lands as France was actually divided into multiple sectors as seen. You know that dude Julius Caesar? Yeah, he capitalized on what was known as Gaul, and later down the line it would be colonized further by the Romans. The Romans established quite a few resources after Julius Caesar successfully marched his campaign through Gaul in the 50 BC era. He had to fight a bunch of tribes and barbarians, but they were all like, oh no, no way we lost to the Romans. But they did. The Frenchies would come around in the medieval era, establishing the proper France name. This leads us to the 100 Years' War. War never stopped in the lands. Sometime in 1337, a bunch of power-hungry nobles from different houses thought, you know what would be funny? If we had a war. Everyone thought, what a great idea. And so the war was on. The 100 Years' War sparked off with a huge debate over religion and the common people. Then after some years of conflict between old royals and noble houses, this chick out of nowhere sprang into action, claiming some wild shit that she could hear God's voice, and he told her to liberate France and its people. Everyone thought she was crazy. Then everybody knew she was batshit crazy when she actually joined the war and won. She was praised and still seen as a saint to this day for liberating France. Vive la France. And her name is none other than Joan of Arc. She's everybody's favorite waifu from Fate. That's right. But she met a cruel fate in the end because everybody thought she was crazy for hearing God and they burned her at the stake. Much like our Salem witch trials in America. So after that era brought about a new age for Enlightenment, politics, and the future of France. So, there was this age to acquire information and knowledge of anything to better themselves and the country. A new age of philosophers and intellectuals were ushered in. Madmen from all over the world that weren't known before were suddenly making it big for themselves in France. You had people like Voltaire who collaborated with this guy Montesquieu. I scuffed that name, but they ushered in new government ideas like the power should be divided and not all on one central authority figure. Otherwise, you get King Louis XVI. But back in these days, you had a nobleman who fucked some other noble's cousin a few years back and remained in power because of that sole reason. There was a serious lack of representation in the country, dividing people into three categories: people with money, people with religious power, and the dumb fucks, which is where a majority of people were. What it boiled down to was the start of the French Revolution. And this is where the little whiny King Louis XVI was voted off for high treason. And this is a king we're talking about. If the country executed their own snobby king for disregarding his people, none of the other nobles stood a chance and they booked it. King Louis was put on trial where not a single soul snitched, for snitches get stitches. He was executed by the famous method, a guillotine. His head rolled off into the basket, and he regrets what he did to his people and country. That's the end of King Louis XVI after he tried to hold his country hostage. People were enlightened enough to not let a con man run the country into ruin. That's why it's called the French Revolution. We're talking about a new age of society and what established the foundation of Western democracy. This would pave way to help minimize future wars by spreading the values of equality for all and abolishing slavery and other unfair treatments. Many influencers during this time took to the cause, establishing the French Revolution as one of the most important events in history that marked an example to the rich and corrupt powerful. There was one prominent man known as Napoleon Bonaparte, and he was a cunning military strategist man who dominated on the field. I don't know where the stereotype came with this dude is short. He's really not. He was the average height during his time, so they claim. Maybe he really was a midget, but we don't know. So, he was basically this refined military commander that seized power during the French Revolution. He owned the French army and he decided to wage war against parts in Europe and even so far to go as Egypt. He targeted Egypt because he said, fuck the UK's trade routes, those belong to the French. So he dominated Egypt. However, when it came time, push to shove, he wasn't badass enough. Instead, he had to run from Russia. His men froze their little boots off in the snow and struggled to understand how Russians, men who wrestle polar bears and win, could survive in such harsh conditions. The French wussed out this time, cut back on their losses, and returned. This sparked the stigma of the French white flag surrender. Napoleon's career was at an all-time low, and he returned to the battlefield again in the notorious Battle of Waterloo, where he took a number 2. France saw some times of peace, so to say, but this is where things get interesting for France. See, they always had these little stick breads, but this man right here, Auguste Zane, he popularized the French baguette and croissant. People still visit France to this day as a tourist because of the bread. And not only is this little bread popular in France, it's invading other parts of the world economically. During the 18th century, the French Revolution made it popular to eat this stick like a piece of bread. However, it became more popularized and industrialized thanks to this dude named Auguste Zane. Is anyone to blame for the French having good bread? It's this guy. They even coined the term baguette. These madmen, they planned to take over Paris, the heart of France, with the love of baguettes. They packed their bags and moved to France, and they actually did it. The baguette was not a term before. It became a term then, and it's still an everyday specialty people enjoy. There are a group of people that became masters of bread making. It was surely the French. The French baguette was envied by the Nazis, and unfortunately they're being mentioned because it's important to this history. If it was anyone who stopped an invasion from the French, it was the Nazis. We're not covering all of World War II, just the important segment here. So Hitler is in power of the Reich here, and he basically brainwashed the German people into believing they were number 1 and needed to take over the world. His schemes worked, and he was just a normal, poor, everyday boy. He climbed the corporate ladder and became to be known as the hater of Jews, his official title. The Nazis took over their neighboring countries, invading and had Europe shook. Multiple nations were scrambling as their combined military efforts couldn't stand a chance against them. Not even the French could. The French, with their economic success of baguettes, had met their match as the Nazis swooped in, conquering parts of France and occupying it, and capitalizing on the baguette industry. Instead of the French making money off bread, it was the Nazis now. Some more complications that we're not going to dive into, but the summary is France had to call in a few allies to assist in the war effort. Not only did Hitler fuck up by pissing Russia off like Napoleon, America was involved because Japan made some dumb moves and almost got themselves entirely blown up. The war efforts were put to a halt as Germany was raided from both sides, and France was free once more. Hitler found himself more mad that he lost France and the baguette industry than losing the actual war. It's pretty much taking us to the conclusion of the video now. France still dominates as the baguette industry to this day, if not one of the top producers of bread. Their techniques have cultivated and innovated the way we make bread to this day. And for that, they've invaded the world and must be stopped. Hope Overlook in this video has seriously assessed and brought up the interesting points on why the French are a threat to the world. If we allow the baguette industry in France to take off any further, we could face serious consequences worse than the French Revolution. Baguettes have always been a root cause of wars, so think next time you munch on some bread. This video is made for entertainment purposes only. Don't take anything I say literally or deliberately. It still summarizes history in a nutshell.